Hey everyone, did you know that most of you watch without subscribing? If you love scary stories, hit that subscribe button and join the creepy crew. A huge thank you to everyone who's already subscribed. You guys are amazing. Don't forget to like the video and leave a comment. I moved into a quiet neighborhood where all the houses lined up neatly along a narrow street. The kind where people nodded good morning as they picked up their newspapers, where the sound of sprinklers and distant lawnmowers filled the air in the evenings. It wasn't fancy, but it felt safe, peaceful. After spending too much on gas lately, I decided to get a bike. Nothing fancy, just something to get me to the grocery store and back. I checked Craigslist and found a listing for a used one at a good price. The seller's address was just a few houses down. That seemed convenient. After work, I walked over to his place. It was a single-story house with a garage door that looked like it hadn't been opened in a while. The guy who answered the door was in his late 40s, maybe early 50s. Short, graying hair. He wasn't exactly unfriendly, but he didn't say much either. His eyes flicked away every time I tried to make eye contact. "The bike's in the garage," he said, stepping aside to let me in. The garage smelled like old wood and motor oil. It was cluttered, but not in a messy way. Tools hanging on the walls, neatly stacked boxes, a workbench covered with small, carefully arranged parts. The bike leaned against the far wall. Decent condition, tires still firm. I checked the brakes, spun the pedals a bit. "It's good," I said. He nodded, hands in his pockets. $50. I handed over the cash, and he didn't even count it. Just shoved it into his pocket and stepped aside so I could wheel the bike out. "Thanks," I said. "I live just a few houses down, so I'll probably see you around." He gave a short nod but didn't respond. I got the sense he wasn't big on conversation. Not rude, just distant. I rode home, feeling like I'd scored a solid deal. I didn't think much of it at the time. Just a quiet guy selling a bike. Nothing strange about that. Nothing that hinted at what was hidden in the depths of that garage. In the first week, I rode the bike almost every day. Just small trips, to the grocery store, the coffee shop, sometimes just around the block when I needed to clear my head. It was a good buy. That's when I started noticing the pickup truck. A dark, older model with a dented front fender. It was always parked in my neighbor's driveway but never moved, at least not when I was around. It blended in, nothing remarkable about it. But I realized I never saw him driving it. More than that, I barely saw him at all. Other neighbors would be out mowing their lawns or chatting by the mailbox, but he kept to himself. No small talk, no casual waves. Just an occasional glance from his window before the blinds dropped shut. I figured some people just preferred to be left alone. Then one evening, I was riding back from the store when I saw a police car pull up in front of his house. At first, I assumed it was just a routine thing. Maybe a noise complaint. Maybe they were checking in on something minor. But the way the officers stepped out of the car, one going straight to the front door while the other lingered near the truck, felt different, more deliberate. I slowed down as I passed, not wanting to stare but unable to help it. The neighbor opened the door a crack, just enough to talk. There was a short exchange, then one of the officers pointed toward the garage. I didn't stick around to watch. It wasn't my business. The next day, a different officer, our neighborhood patrol guy, knocked on my door. "Evening," he said, friendly but formal. "Just making some rounds. You live here alone?" "Yeah," I said. "Everything okay?" He nodded, glancing toward the street. "We're just speaking with folks in the area. Anything unusual you've noticed lately? Strange cars, visitors, anything out of place?" I hesitated, then shook my head. "No, not really." He studied me for a second. Not suspicious, just weighing something. "If you remember anything," he said, Give us a call." I nodded. He left without explaining any further. A few days later, it was like my neighbor had become a different person. He barely showed his face, and when he did, he was tense, on edge. His shoulders hunched, his movements quick and stiff, like he was trying to avoid attention. The blinds in his house stayed shut, and at night, I could see the glow of a single light coming from inside. I wasn't the only one who noticed. One evening, while locking up my bike, I overheard a conversation between two neighbors standing by their mailboxes. They spoke in hushed voices, but I caught enough to make my stomach tighten. His wife was gone. "Went to visit family," one of them said. "If that's true," the other muttered. "Why'd she leave without saying goodbye to anyone?" I hadn't even known he had a wife. I had never seen her. But something about the way they spoke unsettled me. It wasn't just gossip. It was concern. I told myself it wasn't my business, but my mind kept circling back to that day in his garage. The way he avoided eye contact. The way his eyes flicked toward the back of the space. At the time, I hadn't thought anything of it. But now, every time I passed his house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was hidden in there. I tried to focus on work, on my daily routine, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was about to happen. Something bad. One morning, I turned on the local news while making coffee. The words barely registered at first, just background noise, until I heard the name of my street. I turned to the screen. There was my neighbor's house, his driveway, his garage. Yellow police tape stretched across the entrance. The anchor's voice was calm, detached. "A local man has been taken into custody on suspicion of murdering his wife. Authorities executed a search warrant at the residence earlier this morning." The footage shifted. I recognized my street, saw officers moving in and out of his house, carrying evidence bags. My stomach twisted as I realized they were walking in and out of the same garage where I had stood just weeks ago. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. The man who sold me that bike, who stood just a few feet away from me, had been hiding this the entire time. A knock on my door made me jump. When I opened it, two officers stood there. "Sir, we'd like to ask you a few questions." I nodded, stepping aside to let them in. They asked about the bike, about how I'd met him, about anything unusual I'd noticed. I told them everything. How I'd messaged him on Craigslist. How he barely spoke. How he kept looking toward the back of the garage. I showed them the old messages from my phone. The detective took notes, his face unreadable. He didn't tell me much, just thanked me for my time. But before he left, he said one thing that sent a chill down my spine. "We found evidence in the garage." That was all he said. I didn't ask for details. I didn't want to know. After they left, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at my hands. I had been standing right there, right next to whatever they found, and I hadn't known. The case is still open. The details are coming out in pieces, but nothing feels real yet. I keep thinking about how normal he seemed. Quiet, sure, but polite. Just another neighbor. If I hadn't bought that bike, I might never have even spoken to him. I wonder if the night I was there, he was planning something. If he was waiting for the right moment to get rid of evidence. If I had unknowingly interrupted him. Life on our street has changed. The casual evening chats, the friendly waves, they're gone. People keep their doors locked, their conversations brief. No one says it out loud, but we're all thinking the same thing. We had no idea what was happening right in front of us. Now, when I pass that empty house, with the police tape still fluttering in the wind, I get this sick feeling in my gut. I could have noticed something sooner. Could have said something. but I didn't. And now it's too late. That day, I was looking for a cheap replacement for my old bike, which had finally fallen apart last week. Money was tight, so I tried my luck on Craigslist. Among a bunch of listings, I found one that seemed like a great deal, an almost new bike for a ridiculously low price. I messaged the seller and quickly arranged a meeting near his house since it was only a couple of blocks from my neighborhood. From the messages, the guy seemed polite and assured me he just wanted a quick sale. It sounded like a bargain, and I didn't think too much about it. That evening, after work, I rode a bus to the given address, which was on a quiet, empty street. I liked how straightforward everything seemed. Show up, check out the bike, pay, and leave. It was getting dark, but I didn't mind. The area wasn't unfamiliar to me, though I rarely had a reason to go there. The houses looked old but well kept, mostly single-story, with large front yards and chain-link fences. Streetlights were few and far between, casting long shadows on the pavement. The air was still, and the only sound was the occasional rustling of leaves when the wind picked up. As I approached the house, I saw a car parked in the driveway, an older sedan with its trunk open and hazard lights flashing. It looked like someone had been loading or unloading something in a hurry. The house itself had a dim porch light on, but all the other windows were dark. It was one of those properties with a narrow front yard and a small, covered porch. I slowed my steps a little, taking in the scene. Something about it made me uneasy, though I couldn't put my finger on why. Then the seller stepped out from behind the car. He was in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, wearing a gray hoodie and jeans. He had a thin face, dark hair, and a nervous smile. He waved when he saw me, walking over with quick, almost jerky movements. "Hey man, thanks for coming. Bike's right here." His voice was friendly enough, but his eyes kept darting toward the street, like he was checking for something. He motioned to a mountain bike leaning against the side of the house. It looked just like the picture in the ad, clean, barely used. I walked closer, running my hand over the handlebars. It felt solid. "Good deal, huh?" he said, still glancing around. "Yeah, looks nice," I replied, gripping the seat. "Everything works fine?" "Oh yeah, totally. Just don't ride it much anymore. Anyway, you probably want some proof it's all legit, right?" He let out a nervous chuckle. "I got the original receipt and everything inside. Shouldn't take more than a minute." That gave me pause. People don't usually hand over receipts for secondhand bikes. It wasn't like buying a car. Most sellers just wanted cash and to be done with it. But then he added, "You know, just in case. So there's no trouble with the cops or anything. Some people sell stolen bikes, but not me." That sounded reasonable, and honestly, the price was so low that I figured he just wanted to get rid of it fast. Still, something about his energy felt off. He was talking too fast, moving too much, like he was in a hurry to get this over with. Then he gestured toward the house. "Come on, man, it's just inside." I hesitated. The idea of stepping into a stranger's house over a Craigslist deal didn't sit right with me. Normally, I'd insist on staying outside. But he was already walking toward the side of the house, motioning for me to follow. "Front door's a bit jammed," he said, scratching the back of his head. "Gotta use the back entrance. It's quicker." That didn't make sense. Why wouldn't he just bring the papers out? As he moved toward the backyard, I caught something in the corner of my eye. A movement inside the house. One of the windows was dark, but for a split second, I swore I saw a shadow shift behind the glass. Someone was inside. Adrenaline was kicking in, and I pretended to get an urgent phone call. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, frowned as if I had just seen something serious on the screen, and took a step back. "Sorry." I need to take this, I muttered, already turning away. I kept my voice calm, but my body was tense. As I stepped aside, I kept my peripheral vision on the window where I had seen the shadow. It moved again. This time, I was sure of it. Someone was inside, staying low, shifting carefully to avoid being seen. They weren't just casually walking around, they were hiding. My stomach clenched. This wasn't normal. Someone was waiting. The guy in the hoodie hesitated, then forced a laugh. "Hey man, it's just a minute. The papers are right there, I swear." "Yeah, I get it," I said, forcing a polite smile. "Just 1 sec, gotta handle this." I took a slow step backward, keeping my breathing steady. My brain was screaming at me to get the hell out of there, but I didn't want to bolt. If this was what I thought it was, running would just confirm that I knew something was up. The guy exhaled sharply, rubbing his hands together. "Look, I really need to sell this thing tonight. You're not gonna find a deal like this anywhere else, man. Just come in real quick. 2 minutes, tops." "No, sorry, I have to go," I said, cutting him off. I turned fully and started walking back toward my car. His tone shifted immediately. "Come on, man. Don't be like that. I already got everything ready for you." He took a step after me, but I was already unlocking my car door. My pulse was hammering, but I kept my hands steady. I forced myself not to rush, not to look panicked. "Just get in." "Thanks, but I gotta take off," I said, not looking at him anymore. I pulled the door open, slid into the driver's seat, and shut it. He stood there for a second, then exhaled loudly through his nose. "Whatever, man," he muttered. I didn't wait. I started the engine and pulled out of there as smoothly as I could. Only when I was a full block away did I let out the breath I'd been holding. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every little detail replayed in my head. The flashing hazard lights, the nervous way he kept glancing at the street, the shadow in the window. I told myself maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe it was nothing. But the next day, while scrolling through local news, I saw a report that made my stomach drop. A robbery, same area. The victims had been lured through Craigslist, just like me. They had been told to come inside for paperwork. Once they stepped in, a second person attacked them. Sometimes with a weapon, sometimes just with fists. The attackers took whatever they could. Wallets, phones, even car keys. A few people ended up in the hospital. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. That could have been me. I could have walked into that house and never walked out the same way. I felt a cold wave of nausea. My hands shook as I typed out an anonymous tip to the police, describing the address, the man's appearance, and what had happened. A few hours later, I got a reply. They were already investigating a group running scams like this. I wasn't the only one who had narrowly escaped. I sat there, staring at my phone, realizing just how close I had come to serious danger. If I had ignored my instincts, if I had just thought, "Oh, it's fine," and walked through that back door, I might not be sitting here right now. After that, I changed how I handled online deals. I never meet in quiet places anymore. If someone refuses to meet in a public spot, I don't even bother. No more driveways. No more private homes. If the deal isn't happening in a well-lit parking lot with people around, it's not happening at all. Even now, I sometimes think about that guy. His jittery smile. The way he kept urging me inside. The shadow in the window. Sometimes I have nightmares. In them, I don't walk away. I follow him through that back door, and the second it closes behind me, something grabs my arm. I wake up just before I see who, or what, is waiting in the dark. People don't always understand why I'm so cautious now. They roll their eyes when I insist on meeting in a crowded place. They say I'm paranoid. But I know better. I never bought that bike. But I walked away with something far more valuable. A second chance. And I'm not wasting it. I was working as a waiter in a small cafe, always picking up side gigs to keep up with my car payments. Most of the time, I'd scroll through online ads looking for quick jobs, walking someone's dog, helping with a move, washing windows. One evening, I came across a strange listing. Someone was offering $50 just to deliver a short note. All I had to do was tape an envelope to the door of a house and take a picture as proof. It seemed odd, but it didn't sound difficult. $50 for 5 minutes of work? That was too good to ignore. I messaged the guy, asking what it was about. He replied quickly but avoided giving details. He just kept saying it was harmless, just a prank for a friend. Something about it didn't sit right with me. If it was just a joke, why not explain it properly? And why pay so much? I hesitated for a while, but in the end, I told him no. I figured if I had to ask too many questions, it probably wasn't worth the trouble. Still, the thought lingered in my mind. Easy money like that doesn't come often, and I kept wondering if I had been too cautious. The next day, I checked the site again, but the ad was gone. That made me even more curious. If it was just a simple joke, why delete the post so quickly? I started regretting turning it down. $50 for a single delivery. It was hard to shake off the idea that I'd missed out on the easiest money of my life. But something about it kept bugging me. The guy's vague answers, the urgency. It didn't feel right. A week later, I was watching the local news when something made my stomach drop. They were covering a violent attack in a nearby neighborhood. The victim had been assaulted in their own home, and on their door, police had found a note. It said, "You're next." The reporter speculated that it was meant as a threat, possibly linked to the crime. My chest tightened. I couldn't remember the exact address from the ad, but the area matched. The realization crept up on me, slow and sickening. That note, it could have been mine. I realized I could have become an unwitting part of someone's nightmare. A cold shiver ran through me as I imagined it. I would have taped that envelope to the door, taken a quick photo, and walked away, never knowing who was behind it or why they needed it delivered. Most likely, they wanted to scare or threaten that person, and I would have been the middleman, completely unaware. I tried to reassure myself, thinking, at least I turned it down. At least I had a bad feeling about it. But that didn't change the fact that someone else could have taken the job. The questions kept spinning in my head. What if I had done it? Could I live with the knowledge that I helped lead to someone getting hurt or worse? The more I thought about it, the more nauseous I felt. I had been this close to making a decision that could have put me in the middle of something dangerous, something I didn't even understand. I needed to talk to someone. The thoughts were getting too heavy to carry alone. I decided to tell my friend, who worked at a repair shop. He was the kind of guy who always had a logical take on things, and I figured he'd either calm me down or confirm that I had a reason to be disturbed. When I told him the whole story, he didn't laugh or brush it off. Instead, he frowned and said, "Dude, you should tell the cops." I hesitated. I didn't want to get involved in something messy. The last thing I needed was to come off as paranoid or worse, put myself on someone's radar. But the more I thought about it, the more I felt responsible. I had a name, a conversation, some details about the job offer. Even if it wasn't much, maybe it meant something. Finally, I decided to go to the police station. I told an officer about the ad, the messages, the fact that I had almost taken the job. He listened carefully, asked a few follow-up questions, and then told me to send over any screenshots I had. I forwarded everything I could find, though there wasn't much identifying information in the chat. The officer thanked me and said they would check if my tip was connected to the case. He didn't make any promises, just took down the details and assured me they'd look into it. I walked out of there feeling not better exactly, but at least like I had done something. Maybe my information would be useful. Maybe I had just told them a bunch of nothing. Either way, at least I had put it in their hands. Over the next few weeks, I kept thinking about what could have happened if I had said yes. The money had been tempting, clouding my judgment, but in the end, I chose to be careful. That single decision might have saved me from something I wouldn't have been able to walk away from. The police called me a couple of times, asking for small clarifications, but they never shared any major updates. I figured that meant either they were still investigating or I had just been one tiny piece of a much bigger puzzle. Since then, I've never looked at online side gigs the same way. Not every easy job is worth the risk. My friends joke that I've become paranoid, but honestly, I'd rather be paranoid than find myself tangled up in someone else's crime. I got lucky once. I'm not taking that chance again. I spend a lot of time on Craigslist, mostly just browsing. Sometimes you find weird people with even weirder ideas, but most of it is the usual. People selling old furniture, looking for jobs, or offering odd gigs. One night, I came across a listing that immediately caught my attention. The title was vague, something about a medical experiment at home, but the payment being offered was insanely high. It was way more than what anyone would pay for something simple, so I clicked out of curiosity. The description was short but strange. It said they were looking for someone with strong nerves and a willingness to be present for the removal of a body part. That was it. No explanation, no extra details. Just a promise that it would be safe and done in a sterile environment. My first thought was that it had to be a joke or some sort of scam, but the wording felt serious. There wasn't any of that exaggerated nonsense you see in troll posts. It was direct, to the point. I should have ignored it, but I was too curious. I sent a short message asking what exactly they meant. It didn't take long for them to respond. The guy was surprisingly polite, almost overly formal. He explained that he wanted to cut off his own ear, completely remove it, but he needed someone to be there while he did it. He wasn't asking for help. He just didn't want to be alone. I reread the message at least 3 times. It wasn't some weird metaphor. He actually meant it. He even said he'd researched everything, had all the supplies, and was confident it would go smoothly. All he needed was someone to sit there and make sure he didn't pass out or lose too much blood. I didn't reply right away. I wasn't sure what to say. A part of me wanted to ignore him and move on, but another part was fascinated by how serious he sounded. I messaged back, asking why he wanted to do this. He told me he had his reasons, but didn't want to explain right now. If I was interested, he would pay me just for showing up. No pressure, no involvement, just presence. At that point, I knew I should have stopped, but I kept going. I asked him how he planned to do it, what tools he had, if he'd considered seeing a doctor. He said he had a scalpel, bandages, some kind of numbing agent, and a plan to cauterize the wound after. He seemed completely calm about it, almost excited. I asked if he had any medical training. He laughed and said no, but he'd watched a lot of videos and read everything he could find. That answer didn't help. I told him this wasn't a good idea, that he should at least have a professional nearby. He brushed it off. He wasn't interested in doctors, hospitals, or anyone who might try to stop him. Then he started pushing. If I didn't want to come, that was fine. But he needed someone. He kept saying he didn't trust professionals, only neutral people from the internet. He didn't want to be judged. He just needed quiet support. That was all. His messages got more desperate as I hesitated. He was polite, but there was this strange urgency behind his words, like he'd already decided, and nothing was going to change his mind. The money was still on the table, and he promised there was no danger to me. I could leave any time. Something about it felt off. It wasn't just the act itself, though that was disturbing enough. It was the way he spoke about it, like this was some kind of personal mission. He wasn't just curious or experimenting. He was committed. I told him he should talk to a psychologist. That's when his tone changed. He got defensive, almost angry. Said I was like everyone else, trying to convince him he was crazy. He wasn't. He knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't asking for opinions, just a presence. That was it. I stared at the screen for a long time before finally deciding this wasn't something I wanted to be involved in. I never responded after that. I realized the conversation had gone too far and decided to stop responding. But he didn't give up right away. Over the next few days, he sent more messages, practically begging me to at least meet with him and just talk. He wasn't aggressive, but there was something unsettling about his persistence. I started to worry. What if he tried to find me? What if he could track me down through my profile? I had always been careful online, never sharing personal information, but paranoia crept in. The way he spoke, the way he latched onto the idea of me being there, it felt like he wouldn't easily let it go. Then, out of nowhere, he disappeared. No more messages, no follow-ups. A week passed. Then 2. Eventually, I forgot about him. Until one night, while scrolling through news articles, I saw something that sent a chill down my spine. A man had been rushed to the hospital after attempting surgery on himself. The article was short, but it described a neighbor calling emergency services after hearing horrific screams from the apartment next door. By the time help arrived, he had lost a dangerous amount of blood and was barely conscious. They didn't release his name, but I didn't need to see it. I knew. The details matched too well. The method, the isolation, the fact that no one else was involved. It had to be him. For a moment, I just sat there staring at the screen. I tried to convince myself it could be someone else, but the timing was too perfect. I imagined the scene, the mess, the pain, the panic when he realized he'd gone too far. He had been so confident, so sure of his plan, but reality had caught up with him. And if I had agreed to be there? A sickening wave of relief hit me. If I had gone, I would have been a witness to whatever happened in that apartment. Maybe I would have tried to stop him. Maybe I would have frozen, unsure of what to do. Worst case, I could have been dragged into legal trouble for even being there. The thought made my stomach turn. I started questioning everything. How many people like him were out there, blending in online, looking for strangers to be part of their dangerous plans? It wasn't like he seemed insane at first. He was polite, rational, even friendly. If I had ignored my instincts, I might have been sitting in that room when things went wrong. It made me rethink a lot about how I interacted with people online. I had always been curious, open to weird experiences, but this was different. This was real. There was no undoing a mistake like that. I promised myself I'd be more careful. No more engaging with bizarre requests just because they seemed interesting. No more replying to people who set off even the slightest alarm bells. A few weeks later, I checked the original Craigslist post again. It was gone. No trace of it. The account he used had vanished too. I never heard from him again. I don't know what happened to him after that. Maybe he was still in the hospital. Maybe he was getting professional help. I hope so. But every time I think about his messages, about how desperately he wanted me to be there, I feel a deep, cold dread. I told a few friends about it, but most of them didn't believe me. They thought I was exaggerating, that no one would actually try something like that. I didn't argue. I didn't need to convince them. I knew the truth. In the end, I think I made one of the most important decisions of my life by cutting off contact. If I had let curiosity win, if I had said yes, I don't even want to imagine how differently this story could have ended. Since then, I avoid anything remotely suspicious online. No strange offers, no high-paying odd jobs, nothing that feels even a little off. Because now I understand something I didn't before. Some people aren't looking for help. They're looking for an audience. And you don't want to be there when the show starts. I was working as a courier and had just moved to a big city, hoping for better opportunities. The rent here was insanely high, so when I found a Craigslist ad for a cheap apartment with good renovations, I felt like I hit the jackpot. The owner said it was a temporary rental because he was going away for a long time and didn't want the place to sit empty. The price was half the market rate, and the photos showed a clean, well-furnished space. The owner was in a hurry to finalize everything. He told me there were other interested tenants, so if I wanted it, I had to act fast. I didn't have time to overthink it. I signed the lease without properly checking the place. I was afraid if I hesitated, someone else would snatch it up. Moving in felt like a win. The walls were bright, the furniture was comfortable, and the neighborhood was quiet. I finally had a place to myself, and it felt good. I even invited an old friend over for a small housewarming. We drank a little, laughed, and celebrated the new chapter in my life. Everything seemed perfect. A week later, I started noticing red patches on my skin. At first, I thought it was just irritation from the new laundry detergent or maybe stress from work. Then came the sneezing. Constant, unstoppable. I figured it was just seasonal allergies or maybe my neighbor's cat setting me off. But every day, it got worse. The itching became unbearable. Some nights, I'd wake up struggling to breathe. It felt like my throat was closing up. I finally went to a doctor. He asked a few questions, ran some quick tests, and then suggested I might be having an allergic reaction to mold. That made sense. Old buildings often had hidden mold in the walls or vents. When I got home, I started checking everything more carefully. I looked inside the vents, behind the furniture, in the corners of the bathroom. Nothing obvious. But then I noticed something strange. The wallpaper. In some areas, it was layered on unusually thick, as if something was being covered up. I called the landlord. He barely let me finish before brushing it off. "No one's ever complained before," he said. His tone was dismissive, like I was just being paranoid. I felt stuck. I didn't have the money to break the lease and move, and I had nowhere else to go. My symptoms got worse. Some nights, I woke up coughing so hard my chest felt like it was being crushed. My head was constantly pounding. I thought about moving out, but reality hit me. I had spent all my savings on the deposit and furniture. There was no way I could afford another place. And my job required me to stay in this area. I tried to manage it. I kept the windows open as much as possible, wiped down every surface, and even bought an air purifier. But no matter what I did, the damp smell wouldn't go away. It clung to my clothes, my hair, even my skin. Every time I came home, it felt stronger, like it was creeping into me. The doctor prescribed me stronger medication. He warned me that if I didn't remove the source of the allergen, my condition would only get worse. The pills helped, but only for a few hours at a time. I was running on fumes, barely sleeping, barely functioning. I called the landlord again, pressing him about the walls, the smell, the wallpaper. He dismissed me. "Just some minor ventilation issues," he said. His voice was calm, almost bored, like I was making a big deal out of nothing. I started losing sleep. Even when I did manage to drift off, I woke up exhausted, like my body was fighting against something the entire night. My hands trembled at work. I couldn't focus. It felt like I was slowly being drained, like the apartment itself was sucking the life out of me. Then, one night, I woke up gasping for air. It was different from before. This time, my chest locked up completely, and I couldn't suck in a full breath. I stumbled out of bed, my vision swimming. I clawed at my throat, panic setting in. I made it to the window, fumbled with the latch, and shoved it open. The cold air hit me like a slap. I gulped it in, but my head was spinning, my hands numb. Darkness closed in at the edges of my vision. My knees buckled, and I barely managed to grab my phone before collapsing onto the floor. I don't even remember dialing 911. I just remember voices, movement, flashing lights. Then, the white walls of a hospital room. The doctors ran tests. The diagnosis was clear: a severe allergic reaction to mold spores. Not just a mild sensitivity. I had been breathing in toxic levels of it for weeks. The mold was growing somewhere hidden, probably under the wallpaper or deep in the walls. My lungs had already started to show early signs of permanent damage. Then came another blow: my vision. They checked my eyes and found complications. Something about the prolonged exposure affecting my optic nerves. My eyesight was noticeably worse. Everything was blurred around the edges, and bright light stung. I tried calling the landlord. No response. Over the next few days, I kept trying, but his number was suddenly disconnected. The lease agreement? Practically worthless. I had barely read it before signing, and now I realized it was full of loopholes that made it impossible to track him down. He had vanished. I couldn't go back. The doctors made it clear, staying in that apartment any longer would cause irreversible damage. But I had nowhere else to go. My job suffered. I started missing shifts, then whole days. Eventually, I had to quit. My body just couldn't keep up anymore. Now, I live with my parents. Most of my savings are gone, eaten up by medical bills. I have to wear a special mask because any exposure to mold spores sends me into a violent coughing fit. My vision is permanently damaged. Not completely blind, but bad enough that I struggle with daily tasks. I keep blaming myself. For being in a rush, for ignoring the signs, for choosing the cheapest option without thinking about the risks. I've tried to take legal action, but every lawyer tells me the same thing. Tracking the landlord down is nearly impossible. He covered his tracks too well. Every day, I remember that apartment. The damp air, the heavy smell, the way the walls seem to sweat with moisture. It haunts me. Now, I post warnings online, telling people to double-check their rentals, to never ignore strange smells, to always read the fine print. But the biggest lesson? If a deal seems too good to be true, it probably is. It all started when I urgently needed a babysitter for my son. I work in an office and come home late, and my husband is constantly away on business trips. I found an ad on Craigslist. Young woman, seemed nice, provided references, said she was great with kids. We met at a local cafe, and she told me she was studying to become a teacher, loved working with children, and enjoyed developmental games. I liked her immediately. Calm, kind, caring. She held my son confidently, spoke to him gently. She seemed like someone I could trust. I signed a small agreement with her and gave her a key so she could arrive early. The first few days were perfect. My son absolutely thrived around her. He laughed more, played more, even started eating better. She sent me updates throughout the day, pictures of their activities, little notes about what he enjoyed. It felt like I had finally found the right person. Someone responsible. Someone I didn't have to worry about. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual. She was always cheerful, always willing to stay late if I needed her to. If I came home exhausted, she'd offer to clean up the toys or finish washing the dishes before she left. I appreciated her so much for that. It wasn't easy managing everything alone. She was a lifesaver. Then, over time, I realized she wasn't in any rush to leave, even when I got home. At first, it was small things. She'd say she wanted to finish watching a cartoon with my son or quickly wipe down the kitchen counter. It didn't seem strange. It was nice to have someone so helpful. But then she started staying longer, sometimes even sitting at the dining table with me after I put my son to bed, chatting about her classes, her plans, her life. One evening, I came home earlier than usual. I had forgotten an important document on my desk. As I walked in, I heard a drawer shut quickly. I stepped into my home office and saw her standing by my desk, hands still on the drawer handle. She jumped when she saw me. Her face flushed. "Oh, I was just looking for some tissues," she stammered. I glanced at the drawer. It wasn't where I kept tissues. It was where I stored bank statements, old photos, and personal documents. I didn't say anything at first. My son was in the next room. I didn't want to make a scene, but my stomach twisted. "That's my personal stuff," I said quietly. "Please don't go through it." Her eyes darted around. She nodded quickly. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to pry. I just thought I saw some tissues earlier. I won't do it again." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to brush it off. But something about the way she avoided my eyes, the way her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted her shirt, made me uneasy. I forced a small smile for my son's sake. "I think it's best if you head home for the night." She hesitated. Then finally, she grabbed her bag and left. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the drawer. Something wasn't right. The next few days, I watched her more closely. I left casual comments about my finances within earshot, little things about bills or account balances, just to see if she reacted. She kept acting normal with my son, reading to him, singing songs, making him breakfast. She was still the same attentive babysitter. But I started noticing small things. The way her eyes darted around the room when she thought I wasn't looking, like she was scanning for something. The way she'd pause when I walked into a room, like she had been mid-thought and had to reset. At night, after putting my son to bed, I checked my online banking history, looking for any sign that someone had tried to access my accounts. Nothing. No failed login attempts, no changes. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe she really had been looking for tissues. But I couldn't shake the feeling. The next day, I decided to ask my neighbor, who had mentioned in passing that she once hired the same babysitter. I kept it casual at first, just asking how it had gone for her. But as soon as I mentioned the girl's name, my neighbor's face changed. She hesitated, then admitted she had fired the babysitter after noticing strange behavior. She didn't go into too much detail, only that she started feeling uncomfortable having the girl in her home. That was enough to set off alarm bells. I started digging online, searching her name in forums and review sites. That's when I found a few scattered comments, people complaining about inconsistencies in her background. Some had caught her in small lies. Others simply had a bad feeling and let her go. One post, buried deep in a parenting forum, mentioned missing credit cards. That was it. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I called her the next evening and told her I needed to talk. She agreed to come over after my son was asleep. She arrived on time, cheerful as always, like nothing was wrong. I let her inside and went straight to the point. I told her I had concerns, that I had heard things about her past jobs that didn't add up. I asked if she could provide any real proof of her studies, any certificates, any references beyond the ones she had already given. Her smile faltered. She tried to laugh it off, saying she didn't think it was necessary, that I already knew she was good with kids. But I didn't back down. I kept pressing. The more I asked, the more nervous she got. Her excuses became weaker, less convincing. And then, out of nowhere, she snapped. "Fine," she muttered, crossing her arms. "I was only going to take a couple of cards. No one would have even noticed." I stared at her, unable to believe what I just heard. She exhaled sharply, like she had been holding it in. Then, in a quieter voice, she admitted she was in debt, that she had been trying to get out of trouble by taking advantage of people's trust. She kept talking, almost like she wanted me to understand, like she thought I would pity her. I forced myself to stay calm. I wanted to yell, to throw her out, to call the police on the spot. But instead, I just stood up. "If anything goes missing from my house," I said slowly, "I'll go straight to the cops." She looked at me for a long moment, then grabbed her bag and left without another word. I never saw her again. In the end, I was lucky. As far as I could tell, she hadn't stolen anything. At least, not yet. But I wasn't taking any chances. That same night, I changed every password, canceled my bank cards, and set up alerts on my accounts. I went through my documents to make sure nothing had been moved or copied. My son asked about her a few times, but he adjusted quickly to the new babysitter I found through a friend. A few weeks later, I shared my story on a parenting forum. That's when I realized how common this kind of thing was. Other parents replied with their own experiences, babysitters who had stolen jewelry, identity thieves who had used fake references to get hired. It still chills me to think how easily I let a stranger into my home, around my child, simply because she seemed nice. Now, I'm careful. I check everything, because trust is fragile, and once it's broken, it's too late. The faucet in my bathroom broke a few days ago. Water was pouring out non-stop, flooding the kitchen of the apartment below. I had to act fast. Calling an official repair service would take too long and cost too much. So, I turned to Craigslist, searching for a local handyman. That's how I found Mike. His ad said he did plumbing work for cheap. He responded quickly, asking for my address and details about the problem. Over the phone, he sounded polite, professional even. He asked me what kind of faucet I had, explained a couple of possible fixes, and said he could be at my place in an hour. When he arrived, he looked a little disorganized, kind of nervous, but he had plenty of tools. He wasn't wearing any kind of uniform, just jeans and a faded hoodie, but that didn't seem too unusual for an independent handyman. He got straight to work without wasting time, which I appreciated. I let him in without much thought. I watched for a bit as he pulled things out of his toolbox, arranging wrenches and sealant next to the sink. I figured he knew what he was doing, so I stepped back, letting him do his job. The apartment was small, just a one-bedroom, so I could still hear him working while I scrolled through my phone on the couch. The sound of metal scraping against pipes filled the room. Then, I started noticing things. He wasn't just working. He kept looking around the apartment. His eyes moved over the bookshelves, the counter, the doorway to my bedroom. It wasn't casual glancing either. He seemed to be taking mental notes, studying the place. Then he started asking questions. "You live alone?" His voice was casual. I hesitated. "Yeah." "No roommates?" "No." He nodded slowly, still twisting a wrench under the sink. "Neighbors close by?" I shrugged. "I guess. I don't really know them." "You work nights or something? Or are you home most of the time?" That one made me pause. I forced a small laugh. "Why do you ask?" He looked up, smiling. "Just making conversation." I nodded, but my gut was telling me something was off. He wasn't just chatting. It felt like he was gathering information. He worked for a little while longer, then sighed, sitting back on his heels. "You need a new coupling nut. I don't have the right size." He wiped his hands on his jeans. "There's a hardware store a few blocks away. I can run over, grab one, and be back in 20 minutes. I just wanted the faucet fixed." "Yeah, sure." He held out his hand. "Could you cover a little bit up front, just for my time?" I hesitated. Normally, I wouldn't pay until the job was done, but I figured he had put in some effort already. I pulled out my wallet and handed him a small amount. He nodded, slipping the cash into his pocket. "Be right back." The door clicked shut behind him. I sat there for a moment, staring at the sink, listening to the faint drip of water. Something didn't feel right. I couldn't put my finger on it, but a weird unease crept in. Then my phone buzzed, pulling me out of my thoughts. I had things to do. I shook off the feeling and got back to work, pushing the nagging doubt to the back of my mind. Mike came back after dark. He knocked lightly, and when I opened the door, he stepped inside like he had been here 100 times before. He smelled faintly of cigarettes and something metallic. Without much talking, he went straight to the sink and got back to work. I stood nearby, watching as he tightened the last fittings. The faucet looked good as new. No leaks, no dripping. He wiped his hands on his jeans and stood up, looking around the apartment again. His eyes lingered on the windows this time. "You got good locks," he muttered. I nodded, not sure how to respond. He glanced at the door next. Solid build, not easy to break. Something about the way he said it made me uneasy. I forced a small laugh. "Yeah, I guess." I wanted him out of my apartment. I counted the cash and handed him the remaining amount. He took it without looking, stuffing it into his pocket. But he didn't leave right away. Instead, he stood in the doorway, staring at the place like he was memorizing it. "Nice home," he said finally. "Be good to have a place like this." I didn't answer, just held the door open. Mike nodded to himself and stepped out. "Take care." I locked the door the second he was gone. The next morning, I left for work like usual. By the time I got home that evening, it was already dark. As I reached my door, I noticed something was off. A sliver of light from inside my apartment leaked through the doorway. My stomach dropped. The door was slightly open. I pushed it wide, my heart pounding. The apartment was wrecked. Drawers pulled out, their contents spilled onto the floor. My couch cushions slashed open, cabinet doors left swinging. My laptop was gone. My documents, bank papers, passport, even some work files, were missing. Then I saw the worst part. The window in my bedroom was shattered. Glass littered the floor. Someone had broken in. I stood frozen, listening for any sounds, any sign that someone might still be inside. Silence. Whoever had done this was already gone. But I knew. Deep down, I knew. Mike. I called the police, barely able to keep my voice steady. When they arrived, they asked me the usual questions. What was stolen? When did I leave? Did I notice anything strange? I told them everything. About the repair. About the way Mike looked around, the questions he asked, the way he had commented on my locks. One of the officers exchanged a look with his partner. "You said his name was Mike?" "Yeah." The officer sighed. "We've heard that before." Turns out, Mike wasn't just some random handyman. He was connected to multiple break-ins in the area. Always the same pattern. He'd do a small repair job, get a feel for the place, and then come back later to clean it out. But they had never caught him. "He uses fake numbers, fake names," the officer explained. "By the time we trace anything back, he's already moved on." "Do you have any kind of receipt? A contract?" I shook my head. "No. Everything was agreed on verbally." The officer sighed again. "That's the problem. Without a paper trail, it's hard to prove he was ever here." They took their notes, promised to look into it, but I could already tell what the outcome would be. Nothing. I had let him in. I had paid him. I had given him the perfect opportunity to scout out my apartment. And now, I was the one paying the price. The aftermath was worse than I expected. Replacing the stolen items was expensive, but what really hit me was the fear. Every sound at night made me jump. Every creak in the floor made my skin crawl. I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing him standing in my apartment, going through my things, knowing exactly what he wanted to take. My neighbors looked at me differently, some with pity, others with quiet wariness, as if my bad luck might somehow rub off on them. I had to change the locks, install extra security, replace my broken window. The whole time, one thought kept looping in my head. I let him in. I wrote about it online, warning people to be careful. A few days later, a friend messaged me. "Hey, check this out." He sent me a link to another handyman ad. Different name, different number. But the photo? It was Mike. He was already looking for his next target. I don't take risks anymore. If something breaks, I call a licensed service, even if it costs double. Because the price of trusting the wrong person is way, way higher. I've always liked classic coffee makers, the kind that don't have a million buttons or complicated settings. When my old one finally broke, I decided to look for a replacement without spending too much. I checked Craigslist and found a listing from a woman named Betty. She was selling a nearly new machine for an unbelievably low price. The photos looked good, and her description said she had barely used it because she received a more advanced model as a gift. It seemed like a steal, so I contacted her right away. Her house was in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind with neatly trimmed lawns and white picket fences. When I arrived, I noticed a vintage wooden chair on the front porch, slightly weathered but charming. The place looked warm and well-maintained. Betty stepped outside as I parked. She was in her late 50s or early 60s, wearing a soft beige sweater, her gray hair neatly pulled back. She smiled warmly, greeting me with a friendly tone, asking how my day had been. We chatted for a bit as she led me inside. The house smelled of baked goods and fresh laundry. It was tidy, filled with cozy furniture and framed pictures of what I assumed were family members. She walked me to the kitchen, where the coffee maker sat on the counter, looking just as advertised. Clean, barely used. She explained again that she simply preferred the new one her daughter had gifted her. I inspected the machine briefly. Everything seemed fine. No scratches, no visible damage. She even offered to make a cup of coffee with it to prove it worked, but I declined. I trusted her. She didn't seem like the kind of person to scam anyone. We talked a little longer. She mentioned she had lived alone for the past few years, ever since her husband passed away. After about 15 minutes, I paid her in cash, thanked her, and left with my new coffee maker, feeling like I had made a great deal. There was nothing remotely suspicious about the whole encounter. For the first few days, I enjoyed using the coffee maker. It brewed quickly, and I was happy with my purchase. But there was a faint taste in the coffee, something slightly off. I figured it was just the new coffee beans I was trying, maybe a different roast than I was used to. It wasn't strong enough to bother me, so I didn't think much of it. After about a week, I started feeling off. At first, it was just mild nausea and occasional dizziness. I assumed I was overworking myself, or maybe coming down with something. I didn't get sick often, so I ignored it. But as the days passed, the symptoms got worse. The dizziness turned into full-blown vertigo, making it hard to focus at work. My stomach felt constantly unsettled. I blamed stress, lack of sleep, maybe even a minor flu. Then, one morning, while making breakfast, I suddenly felt a wave of weakness wash over me. My vision blurred, my head spun, and before I could react, everything went dark. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. A nurse was adjusting my IV. My head ached. My limbs felt heavy. A doctor came in shortly after and explained that I had collapsed at home, and the paramedics had brought me in. My vitals were concerning: elevated heart rate, signs of dehydration, and something abnormal in my blood work. They ran more tests, and later, the doctor returned with a serious expression. He told me they suspected I had been exposed to a heavy metal toxin, possibly lead or mercury. My symptoms matched chronic poisoning. He asked if I had been around any old pipes, contaminated water, or industrial chemicals. Nothing made sense. I had no idea how I could have been exposed. After a couple of days of treatment, I was discharged with instructions to follow up with a specialist. I still felt weak, but I went back to my normal routine, and I kept using the coffee maker. The symptoms didn't go away. They got worse. My head pounded constantly, sharp and relentless. My hands trembled when I tried to type at work. Simple tasks became frustrating. Buttons slipped from my fingers. My handwriting turned shaky. I started feeling paranoid, but I didn't know what I was afraid of. My friend, who knows a lot about appliances, came over one evening. I had been complaining about my symptoms, and he offered to take a look at the coffee maker, just in case. As he opened the lid and examined the inside, he frowned. "There are weird stains on the metal parts," he said, pointing at tiny dark spots along the internal mechanisms. "This doesn't look normal." That set off alarm bells in my head. I told him about my hospital visit, about the poisoning. He stared at me, then back at the coffee maker. "Maybe we should test the water," he suggested. The idea made sense. We boiled a fresh pot and carefully poured some into a clean glass jar. The liquid looked fine, but I couldn't shake the unease creeping into my gut. I spent the next day searching for an independent lab, finally finding one that accepted walk-ins for water analysis. I dropped off the sample and was told to expect results in a few days. When the results came back, I felt my stomach drop. The water contained dangerously high levels of lead, along with traces of other toxic substances. The kind of contamination that doesn't just happen by accident. I sat there staring at the report, my mind racing. Then, a memory surfaced. Betty's warm smile, her casual conversations, the way she had mentioned she liked experimenting with appliances. My hands went cold. This wasn't an accident. I grabbed my phone and dialed Betty's number. It rang once, then went straight to an automated message. "This number is no longer in service." I tried again. Same result. Panic settled in my chest. I looked up the Craigslist ad, but it was gone. No trace of it anywhere. I searched my messages for our conversation, but the account had been deleted. Betty had disappeared. I wasn't just sick. I had been poisoned. On purpose. The doctors confirmed the worst. The prolonged exposure had caused permanent nerve damage. My hands would never fully recover. The tremors, the weakness, they were my new reality. I would be dealing with chronic pain for the rest of my life. The police got involved once I told them everything. They took the lab report, my hospital records, even the coffee maker itself for further testing. Then came the real shock. There were other reports. Other people who had gotten sick after buying appliances from an older woman who fit Betty's description. She had used different names, different neighborhoods, always coming across as kind, trustworthy. No one had suspected anything. No one had connected the dots until now. The detectives asked me dozens of questions. Did I see anything strange in her house? Did she mention anything specific? But all I could remember were the floral wallpaper, the cozy furniture, and that smile. So harmless at the time, so unnerving now. They believed she had been doing this for years, moving from place to place, changing identities, vanishing before anyone caught on. I was just one of many victims. The worst part was knowing I couldn't do anything. My health was ruined. My hands barely worked some days. And Betty was still out there, poisoning more people. Now, I live with the consequences. My daily routine revolves around pain management, doctor visits, and physical therapy. I had to quit my job. I couldn't type properly anymore, couldn't focus through the headaches. The savings I had are disappearing fast. My life, as I knew it, is over. The police never found Betty. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. No official records, no known relatives, no real leads. Just a series of sick people and broken appliances left behind. I wrote a long post online, warning others, telling them to be careful with secondhand deals, to think twice before trusting a friendly stranger. It's the only thing I can do now. Sometimes, at night, when I'm half asleep, I hear a knock at the door. My heart pounds. I know it's just my imagination. But then, I smell it. That sickly, bitter scent of coffee. The taste that ruined my life. We moved into a small rental house with a neat little lawn. It was quiet, peaceful. Nothing unusual ever happened until our cat slipped out through a door we didn't realize was open. We searched the neighborhood for days, calling his name, shaking a box of food, hoping he'd come running. We put up flyers, posted online, checked shelters. Nothing. No one had seen him. A week passed, and we were starting to lose hope. Maybe he had wandered too far. Maybe someone took him in. Or maybe something worse happened. Then, out of nowhere, a man called. He said he had found a cat that matched our description. He didn't give much detail, just that he had the cat at his place, and we could come pick him up. I asked him to send a photo, but he made excuses. His phone's camera was broken. He didn't know how to send pictures. He sounded older, maybe in his 50s or 60s. His voice rough and slow. When I hesitated, he quickly added that he had health problems and couldn't bring the cat to us. We'd have to come to him. We were relieved, but also confused. Why hadn't he asked for a reward? Why did he sound almost impatient? But we ignored the feeling. If there was any chance this was our cat, we had to go. We got in the car and drove to the address he gave us. The further we went, the stranger it got. The city lights faded behind us, replaced by long stretches of dark, empty road. The man's address led us to an industrial area on the outskirts of town, where old warehouses and abandoned buildings stood in silence. Street lights were either broken or missing. No cars, no people, just darkness and the occasional flicker of something moving in the distance. My girlfriend shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "This doesn't feel right," she murmured. I didn't answer, but I felt it too. When we arrived, we found a single run-down warehouse standing apart from the rest. The building was silent, the metal siding rusted and peeling. There were no signs, no windows, just a single crooked door. The place looked abandoned. I called the man again. He picked up immediately, his voice the same, calm, a little too firm. "Go inside," he said. "The cat's in the back." I hesitated. "You're not coming out?" "I can't walk too well," he said quickly. "Just go in. He's in there." Something about his voice made my stomach knot. I looked at my girlfriend. She was gripping the steering wheel tightly, her breathing shallow. "We should go," she whispered. "But what if our cat was in there? What if he was scared, hiding, waiting for us?" I stepped out of the car. The night air was cold. The building loomed over us, silent and still. I reached for the door handle, hesitating. My girlfriend got out too, wrapping her arms around herself. "We shouldn't be here," she said. I pushed the door open. Darkness. A faint, musty smell drifted out. I took a step inside. We stepped into the dimly lit space, the air thick with dampness and the lingering scent of something stale. The weak glow of a single overhead lamp cast long, uneven shadows, barely illuminating the clutter of crates and debris scattered across the concrete floor. As my eyes adjusted, I caught a glimpse of movement, two figures darting behind a stack of boxes in the far corner. A wave of cold fear shot through me. My grip tightened around my girlfriend's wrist, and I whispered, "We need to leave. Now." Before we could move, a faint scuffling sound came from behind us. Someone was there, watching. My pulse pounded in my ears as we turned slowly, straining to see through the darkness. But there was no cat. No soft meow, no scratching, nothing to indicate that our pet was anywhere nearby. Instead, the silence was broken by hushed voices, words too quiet to make out. The whispers sent a chill down my spine. That was when it hit me. This wasn't just some misunderstanding. This was a setup. I swallowed hard and forced my voice to stay steady. "Stay calm," I murmured to my girlfriend. "We're walking out of here." Keeping our steps light, we started inching backward toward the entrance, careful not to make any sudden movements. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew better. If we bolted, they'd chase us. We had to make it outside first. We had to get to the car. We had moved only a few feet when the sound of metal scraping against concrete echoed through the space. It was deliberate, heavy. Someone had just shifted something large, something meant to block our path. I pulled out my phone and switched on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness and landed on a hooded figure standing just a few yards away, facing us. They didn't move. I barely had time to react before a second shape appeared in my peripheral vision, creeping closer from the side. The realization sank in fast. They had been waiting. They hadn't expected us to turn back so quickly. No more hesitation. I grabbed my girlfriend's hand and yanked her forward, sprinting toward the door. Footsteps pounded behind us. One of them lunged, but I heard a sharp thud and a grunt. He must have tripped over something. I didn't stop. We hit the exit at full speed, shoving the door open and stumbling out into the cold night air. The car was only a few feet away. My hands fumbled with the door handle as I shoved my girlfriend inside and jumped in after her. A shadow moved in my rearview mirror. Two dark figures stood frozen in the warehouse doorway, watching. I didn't wait to see if they'd follow. I turned the key, the engine roared to life, and I slammed my foot on the gas. The tires screeched against the pavement as we sped away, the warehouse shrinking into the distance. No one chased us. No headlights appeared in the mirror. But my hands were shaking as I gripped the wheel, my heart still racing. When we got home, we went straight to the computer. I searched the warehouse's address, my fingers moving frantically over the keyboard. The results made my stomach turn. It had been abandoned for years. More than that, there were reports of illegal activity tied to the location. Smuggling, stolen goods, even suspected human trafficking. A few months ago, police had found evidence of something big, but never caught the people responsible. And now, we had nearly walked right into their hands. We filed a police report, giving them the phone number the man had used. They took it seriously, but their warning stuck with me. Criminals use tricks like this all the time. Luring people with lost pets, fake job offers, anything to get someone to an isolated location. Our cat never came home. No more calls, no more sightings. I'd like to believe he's still out there somewhere, roaming free. But that night changed us. Now, when the phone rings from an unknown number, we hesitate before picking up. And whenever I close my eyes, I still see them. Those shadowy figures in the dark, standing just out of reach. I had been wanting to upgrade my old computer for a while, but money was tight, so I started looking for used options on Craigslist. I came across a listing for a laptop being sold at a ridiculously low price. The seller was in a hurry to get rid of it, saying he was moving out of town and didn't have time to waste. We exchanged a few messages, and he suggested meeting that evening in a parking lot near a closed-down store. I hesitated. Normally, I tried to meet in crowded places during the day, but he insisted he was in a rush. He claimed he had no flexibility, and I really didn't want to miss out on such a deal. It was a high-end model, at least on paper, and the price was too good to ignore. In the end, I convinced myself it would be fine. I figured as long as I stayed alert and careful, nothing bad would happen. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. That was my first mistake. When I pulled into the parking lot, it was nearly empty. A few dim streetlights cast weak orange glows over the cracked pavement. The only other vehicle there was an old sedan with its parking lights on. The windows were tinted, but I could see someone sitting in the driver's seat, hood pulled up over his head. I parked a few spaces away and got out, keeping my phone in my hand like it would somehow make me safer. At least if I looked like I was texting someone, it might discourage anything sketchy. The driver's side window rolled down a few inches, and a man's voice called out, "Laptop's on the back seat. Come take a look." Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. The voice was flat, almost impatient. I took a step closer, just enough to see inside the car. That's when I noticed there was someone else in the passenger seat, barely visible in the shadows. Whoever it was, they were deliberately keeping their head turned away from me. My heartbeat picked up. This was the kind of situation I had always told myself I'd never walk into. But now I was here, and I didn't want to look paranoid. I hesitated for a second, then forced myself to take another step closer, trying to act normal. The seller pushed open the car door, and I could see the laptop case lying on the back seat. I hesitated for a second before leaning in slightly, trying to get a better look. Just as I was about to reach for the case, the second person in the passenger seat suddenly shifted. The movement was quick, deliberate, like they were getting ready to do something. A cold sense of alarm shot through me. I instinctively took a step back, my body tensing. That's when the driver lunged out of the car. He moved fast, too fast, pulling something from his jacket. A blade. It wasn't huge, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. He stepped toward me, his posture aggressive, his grip on the knife firm. "Hey," he started to say, but I wasn't going to wait around to hear the rest. Adrenaline kicked in. I spun on my heel and sprinted toward my car. Behind me, I heard shouting, angry, frustrated. Heavy footsteps pounded against the pavement. I had no idea how close they were, but I wasn't going to turn around to check. My only focus was reaching my car before they caught up. My keys were in my pocket. I fumbled for them while running, my breath coming fast and hard. My car was just a few steps away. I felt like my heart was going to explode, the fear pushing me forward faster than I thought possible. I reached the driver's side door and yanked it open. I threw myself into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut and locking it in one motion. My hands were shaking so badly it took me 2 tries to get the key into the ignition. The other car's headlights were still on. I expected to see the driver and his accomplice rushing toward me, trying to block me in. But they weren't moving. Maybe they hadn't expected me to react so fast. I didn't wait to find out. As soon as the engine roared to life, I hit the gas, tires screeching as I peeled out of the parking lot. My pulse was hammering in my ears. I didn't stop at the first intersection, or the second. I just kept driving, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. It wasn't until I had put several blocks between myself and that parking lot that I let myself slow down. My chest was rising and falling in rapid bursts, my mind still racing. I needed to call the police. For a few minutes, I just sat there, gripping the wheel, trying to process what had almost happened. I could still hear the distant echoes of their voices in my head. The way the second guy had stayed in the shadows. The way the driver had moved, like he'd done this before. I picked up my phone and dialed emergency services. The dispatcher asked me to describe what had happened. I told them about the Craigslist ad, the parking lot, the man with the knife. Gave them the address, described the car and the 2 men as best as I could. "We'll send a patrol unit to check the area," the dispatcher said, but I already knew what that meant. By the time the cops got there, those guys would be gone. People like that didn't stick around after a failed attempt. I hung up, my stomach twisting with a mix of fear and embarrassment. I had been so reckless. I knew better than this. But I had let my eagerness for a good deal cloud my judgment. I could have been robbed, stabbed, worse. The next day, I was scrolling through local news when I saw a headline that made my stomach drop. "Man robbed at knife point in parking lot scam." It was the same location, same setup. Someone else had gone there for a deal, and they hadn't been as lucky as me. The article said the victim had been ambushed when he leaned into the car. The attackers had taken his wallet, phone, and car keys before speeding off. He hadn't been seriously injured, but the implication was clear. It could have been a lot worse. I stared at the screen for a long time. That could have been me. I went online and wrote an anonymous post on a local forum, warning people to avoid sketchy meetups like that. "If a deal seems too good to be true, it probably is," I typed, my fingers still slightly trembling. When my friends found out what had happened, they were furious. Not at the criminals, at me. "You never meet someone at night in an empty parking lot," one of them said. "You only meet in public places with cameras, preferably inside a store." They were right. I had been careless. Now, whenever I see a listing for some ridiculously cheap item, I hesitate. I double-check. I ask myself if it's worth the risk, because I know, without a doubt, that I came dangerously close to making a mistake that could have cost me everything. And I'm not making that mistake again. I had a long drive ahead to the next state, and gas prices were ridiculous. So I looked for ride shares to split the cost. On Craigslist, I found a post from a guy heading the same way, looking for people to chip in for fuel. We exchanged a few messages. He seemed friendly, said he had a spacious car, and assured me it would be a comfortable ride. On the agreed day, I arrived at the meeting spot and saw an old SUV waiting. The driver was a guy named Dave, probably in his early 30s. He had a relaxed smile, nothing that set off alarms. We exchanged a few words, loaded up, and hit the road. At first, everything was fine. We chatted about music, local news, just normal small talk. The highway stretched out ahead, and I started thinking I'd lucked out with a decent ride. The car was a little worn down but ran smoothly. He drove confidently, no reckless speeding or weird lane changes. The road was mostly empty, and the first hour or so passed without anything unusual. Then, little things started feeling off. Dave shifted the conversation away from casual topics and started asking more personal questions. He wanted to know about my job, how much I made, if I lived alone. He asked if I had a family, if anyone was expecting me. It wasn't outright creepy, but something about his tone made me careful with my answers. I kept things vague, steering the topic back to neutral ground. But he kept pushing. His mood shifted. He wasn't as chatty anymore, but when he did speak, his words had a different energy. Less friendly, more probing. He asked if I had ever been in trouble with the law, if I owned a gun, if I believed people were too trusting. The way he spoke felt like he was leading to something, testing reactions. I kept my face neutral, answering in a way that wouldn't give him anything to latch onto. Then his driving changed. He pressed the gas harder, speeding up in stretches where there was no reason to. His hands gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white. At times he'd slow down just as suddenly, the force shifting me forward in my seat. I suggested we take a break at the next rest stop. He waved it off at first, then flat out refused, saying he didn't like making too many stops. I let it go, not wanting to push. Maybe he just wanted to get there fast. But the tension in the car kept building. He went from silent stretches to suddenly blasting music at full volume, then cutting it off mid-song. The air in the car felt heavy, like something was brewing under the surface. Then, almost casually, he muttered that he didn't like being told how to drive. Halfway through the trip, I really needed to stretch my legs and get some water. The air in the car felt stifling, and my nerves were on edge. I cleared my throat and said, "Hey, let's pull over at the next rest stop. Just need a quick break." Dave shot me a sharp look, something in his expression shifting. His grip on the wheel tightened before he responded. "Sit tight. We'll stop when we get there." That set off alarms in my head. Normally, rideshare drivers don't care if passengers want to take a quick stop. His refusal felt off, like he had a reason to keep me in the car. I glanced at the road ahead. Nothing but long stretches of highway and empty land. No gas stations, no towns, just miles of desert. I pushed a little. "Man, I really need a break. Just a couple minutes to stretch." His jaw clenched, and then his voice rose. "What? You don't trust me?" He scoffed, shaking his head. "You think I'm gonna do something? If you don't like it, you can get out right now." That shut me up. We were moving at a solid 70 mph. Getting out wasn't an option. The way he said it, the way his voice carried an edge, sent my pulse hammering. My mind raced with possibilities. Where was he really taking me? Was he planning to stop at all? A dozen bad scenarios ran through my head, and none of them ended well. I kept still, hands on my lap, trying to act normal while calculating my next move. I needed a way out. I forced myself to stay calm and think. If I panicked, I'd lose control of the situation completely. I needed to make him think I wasn't a problem. Slowly, I reached for my phone. Keeping my tone light, I said, "Gonna check in with my friend real quick, just letting them know the trip's going fine." I pressed the phone to my ear, pretending to call someone. "Hey, yeah, all good. We're just passing through, about an hour out now." I glanced at the road signs and started reading them aloud. "Yeah, driving a black SUV. Dave's the driver. Seems cool." Dave tensed but didn't say anything. His fingers drummed against the steering wheel, his eyes flicking toward me. I kept going. Yeah, I'll text you the plate number. Oh, and we're stopping soon for gas. I'll call again when we do. That changed something. His posture stiffened, but then he eased off the gas a little. I could tell he was thinking. Was I bluffing? Had I actually sent the plate number to someone? He couldn't be sure. And that hesitation was what I needed. I kept up the act, nodding and mumbling responses as if I was really talking to someone. I even chuckled once, like I wasn't just stalling for my life. Then, as if he made a decision, he exhaled sharply and muttered, "Fine, we'll stop at the next gas station." I kept my phone up a little longer just in case. Yeah, stopping soon. I'll call again in a few. I could feel his frustration radiating off him, but he didn't say anything else. We drove in silence until the gas station came into view. The second he pulled into the lot and the engine cut off, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my bag, yanked the door open, and stepped out fast. I didn't even bother looking at him, just walked straight toward the gas station doors, heart pounding. My legs felt stiff, but I forced them to keep moving. Inside, I headed straight for the counter. The cashier, a middle-aged guy with glasses, barely looked up. "Need gas?" I shook my head quickly. "No, I need a ride. Can you help me call a cab or something?" That got his attention. He peered at me over the register. "Everything all right?" I glanced over my shoulder. Dave was still at his SUV, leaning against the driver's side, watching. He wasn't coming after me, but his eyes were dark, unreadable. Maybe he realized there were cameras. Maybe he knew I had made too much noise for this to go unnoticed. "Yeah," I lied. "Just need a different ride." The cashier nodded slowly, then reached for his phone. "I'll call someone." Relief flooded through me as I heard him dial. Dave didn't move. He just stood there, arms crossed, staring. His expression wasn't anger. It was something worse. Disappointment. Like I'd ruined something for him. I didn't care. When the taxi finally pulled up, I got in without looking back. As we drove away, I finally exhaled, my whole body sagging. My mind replayed the what-ifs over and over. What if I hadn't faked that call? What if I had waited too long? One thing was for sure. I was never trusting a Craigslist ride again. I lived alone in a 2-story house, with the upper floor mostly empty. Money was always tight, so I figured I could rent out a room to cover some bills. I put up an ad on Craigslist, describing the setup: a private bedroom, shared kitchen, and bathroom. A middle-aged man responded, introducing himself as John. He said he didn't have much stuff and lived a quiet life. We met at a cafe near my place. He looked tired but was polite, said he had just moved to the city. He didn't ask many questions about house rules, just kept repeating that he would be an unobtrusive neighbor. That didn't really bother me at the time. I was more focused on getting some help with expenses. We agreed on a price, he paid a small deposit, and I gave him a key. John was a quiet tenant. I barely saw him, and when I did, he always seemed busy. He never caused any problems, never played loud music, never had people over. Honestly, I was relieved. A bad roommate could have made my life a lot harder. At first, I was happy with how easy it all was. Rent was on time, and he kept to himself. The only thing I really noticed was that he rarely left his room during the day, but he was often out at night. I assumed he worked a night shift somewhere. That was fine by me. Less chance of us getting in each other's way. But there were little things that, looking back, should have made me more curious. Every so often, John would bring in heavy bags, always making sure to carry them straight to his room. I never asked what was inside. It wasn't my business, and I didn't want to be the kind of landlord who pried into someone's life. One morning, I woke up and smelled something strange. It wasn't strong, but it lingered in the air, something chemical, maybe like paint thinner or some kind of industrial cleaner. I assumed it was something for a home project or repair and didn't think too much about it. John seemed like a decent guy, and things were peaceful enough. We had an easy arrangement, and for a while, I didn't have any reason to question it. The neighbors started glancing at me whenever they saw John heading to his car at night. A few even mentioned that he looked nervous, like he was always on edge. But I shrugged it off. People have all sorts of reasons for acting a little off. Who was I to judge? Still, after a couple of months, I couldn't shake a strange feeling. Something wasn't right, though I couldn't put my finger on it. One night, while John was out, I heard a loud thud from his room, like something heavy had fallen over. I called out his name. No answer. For a moment, I stood there, debating whether to check inside. But breaking into someone's room? That felt like crossing a line. I told myself I was overthinking it. Then there were the packages. Every now and then, John received large deliveries. No shipping company logos, no recognizable labels. The packages would arrive, and he'd be out the door in seconds, grabbing them before I even had a chance to look closely. He never talked about them, never mentioned work, never had visitors. It was like he barely existed outside those nighttime trips. Something was definitely off. But I kept telling myself, as long as he paid rent and didn't cause problems, it wasn't my business. It all came crashing down in the middle of a regular afternoon. A loud knock at my door. Not the usual polite tap. This was forceful, urgent. When I opened it, 2 police officers stood there. Serious faces. One of them spoke first. "We need permission to search your house." I felt my stomach drop. "Why? What's going on?" They explained. There was an ongoing investigation into illegal drug shipments in the area. They had tracked several suspicious packages to my address. I tried to stay calm, but my mind was racing. "I don't know anything about that," I said quickly. They gave me a look that made it clear they'd heard that line before. "You can let us in voluntarily," the officer said, "or we can get a warrant." I hesitated. If I refused, it would only make things worse, and I didn't want to risk getting dragged into something serious just because I had rented out a room. "Okay," I said finally. "Come in." The officers moved fast, heading straight for John's door. They didn't bother knocking. One of them pulled out a tool, worked on the lock for a few seconds, and then pushed the door open. Inside, it was worse than anything I could have imagined. Bags. Dozens of them, stacked neatly. Small plastic packets inside, sealed tightly. The air was thick with the same chemical smell I had ignored before. I felt frozen in place, staring at the evidence of what had been happening under my own roof. John had been using my house as a drug storage facility. My knees felt weak. I wanted to say something, but what was there to say? What? The officers were already calling it in, voices clipped and professional. One of them turned to me. "Where is he?" I don't know. He usually goes out at night." That was all they needed. The search team kept going while another officer stepped outside, calling in backup. It turned out they had already planned a larger operation. Within minutes, more police arrived. John didn't get far. He must have noticed something was off because he tried to slip away through a side street. But they caught him just a block over. I didn't see it happen, but one of the officers told me later that he had tried to run. They had been watching him for weeks, waiting for the right time. Now, they had everything they needed. And I was caught in the middle of it. The interrogation lasted for hours. They wanted details. How I had met John. How long he had been living there. If I had ever noticed anything suspicious. Every time they asked, I felt more and more like an idiot, because looking back, it was obvious. It was the late-night trips, the secretive deliveries, the locked door, the smell. I had ignored every single red flag. They searched my accounts, my messages, my payment records. They wanted to know if I had received extra money, if I had knowingly allowed this to happen. I had to hire a lawyer, spend money I didn't have just to prove that I wasn't involved. And eventually, they believed me. I wasn't charged. They had no reason to think I had anything to do with it. But that didn't change the damage. My house had been a crime scene. My name was in reports. Neighbors whispered. People looked at me differently. Even after it was over, I couldn't shake the feeling that my home wasn't mine anymore. I had spent so much time worrying about money, trying to make things work, and in the end, I had walked straight into a nightmare. I never rented the room out again. I don't think I ever will. I found the listing while scrolling through the free stuff section, looking for furniture to furnish my new apartment without spending too much. A sofa in excellent condition, completely free if I could pick it up myself. The guy who posted it said he was moving and needed to get rid of old things fast. It seemed like a great deal. I called him, and he answered right away. His voice was calm, polite. He explained that he had already moved most of his stuff out, and the house was basically empty. Just a few things left to take care of, including the sofa. He gave me an address and asked me to come in the evening when he'd be there grabbing his last boxes. That actually worked for me. I had work during the day, so an evening pickup was convenient. I asked if he had someone to help move it, but he said the sofa was light and already packed. "You'll be fine," he said. His tone was casual. Then he added something that felt a little weird. "Just come in. The door will be open." That made me pause. Who just leaves their door open like that? But I figured he was busy, probably going in and out, maybe cleaning up or moving things to a truck. I shrugged it off. Free couch. Too good to overthink. I got there just as it was getting dark. The neighborhood was mostly empty, one of those older suburbs with wide streets and big, spaced-out houses. But this street had an odd feel. Only a few lights on in the distance, most houses dark. No cars, no people, just quiet. The house itself was a two-story place with peeling paint and a yard full of overgrown weeds. No moving truck outside, no lights on inside. Just a big, empty-looking house standing in silence. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, then tried calling the guy. The call rang once, then went straight to voicemail. That was strange, but I remembered what he said. The door would be open. I tried the handle. It turned easily. Stepping inside, I expected the usual moving mess. Half-packed boxes, dust, maybe some furniture left behind. But the place was off. The air was stale, like it hadn't been lived in for a while. Boxes were stacked haphazardly near the entrance, filled with old books, faded clothes, random junk. Things that didn't look like someone's recent belongings, but more like they'd been sitting there for years. "Hey, I'm here for the couch," I called out. My voice echoed slightly. No response. I moved further in. The living room was large but empty, except for an old wooden chair pushed against the wall. The wallpaper was peeling in places, leaving behind patches of stained drywall. A faint smell of dampness hung in the air, but no couch. Something about the house didn't feel right. It wasn't just the emptiness. It was the kind of emptiness that felt abandoned rather than recently moved out of. Out of nowhere, a man stepped out from a shadowed corner of the room. I hadn't heard him approach. He wore a faded hoodie with the hood up, his hands tucked into the front pocket. His face was partially obscured by the dim light, but I could see his eyes fixed on me. "You here for the couch?" he asked. His voice was flat, a little rough. "It's in the basement. Come on, I'll show you." Something about the way he said it put me on edge. There was pressure in his tone, like he expected me to follow without question. I hesitated. "Why would it be in the basement?" I asked. "If you're moving it out, wouldn't it be easier to keep it upstairs?" He didn't answer right away, just stood there for a second too long. Then he shrugged. "Just come see," he said, turning slightly as if expecting me to move. A bad feeling crawled up my spine. None of this made sense. My mind flashed back to the stories I'd read online about people getting lured into places and never coming back. Everything about this felt like one of those warnings. "Where's the owner?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. "I spoke to him earlier." The man didn't hesitate this time. "I'm the owner," he said. "Used a different number to post the listing." That was a lie. The voice on the phone had been different, smoother, more relaxed. This guy's voice was lower, rougher. My chest tightened. I needed to leave. I forced a smile. "All right," I said, pretending to accept his explanation. "Mind if I take a quick look at the couch first, just to make sure it's in good shape?" His expression didn't change. "No problem," he said. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "Just don't turn on the light. Power's shut off." That was the final red flag. No way I was going into a dark basement with this guy. He turned slightly, as if expecting me to follow. The second his attention shifted, I bolted. I spun on my heel and sprinted for the door. Behind me, I heard a sharp intake of breath, then a string of curses. Heavy footsteps pounded the floor as he rushed after me. My heart was slamming against my ribs. The exit was close, just a few more steps. I reached the door, grabbed the handle, and yanked it open. Cold night air rushed in. I didn't look back. I threw myself outside and slammed the door shut behind me. I could still hear him moving inside, but I wasn't stopping. I sprinted to my car, fumbling for my keys. My hands were shaking. I yanked the driver's side door open, jumped in, and locked it. As I started the engine, I saw movement from the house. A face appeared in one of the dark windows, just barely visible in the dim light. I couldn't make out the details, but I knew it wasn't the same guy. There was someone else in there. I didn't wait to find out more. I hit the gas and tore down the street, not slowing down until I was far away. At home, the reality of what had just happened sank in. My whole body felt numb. That wasn't just some weird misunderstanding. Something was seriously wrong with that house. I pulled out my phone and checked the listing again. It was gone. I searched the site, looking for anything similar. After a few minutes, I found it. Same picture, same couch. But the description was slightly different, and the contact number had changed. My stomach dropped. This had been posted multiple times. Different wording, different numbers. The same house. How many people had gone there before me? And how many hadn't made it out? I dialed the police anonymously and reported the address. I told them about the abandoned house, the strange man, the constantly changing listings. The officer on the other end took the information, said they'd look into it. But there was no urgency in his voice. No guarantee they'd actually do anything. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about that basement, about what might have been waiting down there. I never found out what happened after I left. Never checked back to see if the police followed up. I just knew I wasn't going anywhere near a place like that again. I didn't get the couch. But I did get something else. An understanding that some free deals are way too expensive. I I got into amateur photography and thought I could make some extra money with it. I put up an ad saying I'd take pictures of anything for a small fee, just to get more practice. It didn't take long before I got a response from someone asking me to photograph different spots around my neighborhood. Private yards, parked cars, street views from inside courtyards. He promised good pay and sent specific addresses with clear instructions on what to capture. I thought it was a little strange, but his reasoning seemed logical. I'm working on a research project, collecting data on typical urban layouts and residential planning. At first, it didn't bother me. I walked around with my camera, took pictures of building facades, roads, and fences, and emailed them over. The money came in quickly, the payments were always prompt, and for a while, it felt like easy money. Just a few photos, a couple of emails, and I was getting paid. No face-to-face meetings, no negotiations, just a simple task with clear directions. After a few weeks, though, things started to feel off. Every time I sent in a batch of photos, the guy would disappear for a couple of days, then return with a new list of addresses. His requests became more specific. He wanted close-ups of windows, detailed shots of doors, angles from the back entrances of buildings. Places where security cameras weren't installed. I asked if this was really for research, and he kept insisting, yeah, it's just a very specific project. Everything's fine. He paid well, which quietly reassured me. The money was adding up, and I was getting closer to buying a new lens I'd been eyeing. But something gnawed at me. Why did he need such detailed shots? Why was he so interested in private homes, especially in wealthier neighborhoods? I kept telling myself it was all for some architectural study. Then it all became clear. One morning, I was scrolling through local news when I saw the headline, "String of burglaries in residential neighborhoods. Police suspect planned operations." I clicked on it without thinking, and as I read the article, my stomach dropped. Every single address mentioned in the report, the homes that had been broken into, was a place I had photographed. The police suspected that the burglars had gathered detailed information beforehand, scouting security measures and entry points. I felt like someone had dumped a bucket of boiling water over me. I realized that I had unknowingly helped criminals. I had provided them with everything they needed: photos of entrances, blind spots, even which houses lacked cameras. It was all so obvious in hindsight. The increasingly specific requests, the focus on back entrances, the generous payments. I should have seen it coming. But I hadn't. Instead, I had kept my head down, sent my pictures, and taken the money without asking questions. Guilt hit me hard. Every image I had taken replayed in my mind. But now, instead of being just photos, they were like blueprints for a crime. People had been robbed, maybe even hurt, because of me. And all for what? A few $100 for a new camera lens? I kept telling myself that I didn't know, that I had no idea what I was getting into. But that didn't change the fact that I had been part of it. Maybe I hadn't broken into those houses myself, but I had given someone else the tools to do it. And now, the only thing I could do was hope that it wasn't too late to fix my mistake. I decided to cut all ties. I messaged the guy and told him I was done. No explanations, no details, just a simple excuse. I'm moving out of town, won't be able to take any more photos. I waited for a response, expecting questions, maybe even a push to keep going. Instead, he just replied, "Understood." And that was it. No further messages, no attempt to convince me otherwise. He disappeared. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. I kept thinking about the houses I had already photographed. Had I given them everything they needed? Were there more break-ins coming? My guilt became unbearable, and for the first time, I thought about going to the police. It took me 2 days to work up the nerve. When I finally called, I kept my voice low and tried to keep it vague. I have information about some recent burglaries, I said. The officer on the other end sounded calm, almost too calm. He started asking questions, and I found myself confessing everything. The online job, the payments, the addresses, the kinds of photos I had taken. I told them I hadn't known what I was doing, that I hadn't realized what was happening until I saw the news. I braced myself for the worst. I expected them to accuse me of being an accomplice, to say I was just as guilty as the burglars. But all they said was, "We'll look into it." That was almost worse than being yelled at. It left me in limbo. Would they come back for more questions? Would they arrest me? Would they even take me seriously? I had no idea. Ever since that call, I've been living with a constant weight on my shoulders. I don't know if the police ever caught the people behind it. I don't know if my information helped or if it was too little, too late. But I do know that I can't go back to photography the way I used to. Every time I lift my camera, I hesitate. What if I capture something that gets used for the wrong reasons? What if, without realizing it, I help someone do something terrible again? I used to enjoy taking photos of the city, of empty streets, of buildings in the quiet morning light. Now, I just see them as potential targets. I keep looking over my shoulder. Maybe I'm just paranoid, but I can't shake the feeling that someone could come for me. Either the police, asking more questions, or worse, the people I unknowingly worked for. Some nights, I dream about them breaking into my place the same way they did to those houses, silencing me before I can say anything more. I know I can't change what happened. I know I can't undo the damage I might have caused. But I still wish I could go back and tell myself to stop before it was too late. I'd been looking for easy side gigs for years, something simple with decent pay and no hassle. One day, I came across an ad on Craigslist. Need a small package delivered to the suburbs. Good pay, nothing complicated. The offer seemed straightforward. Pick up a package, drop it off, get paid. They even promised an advance transfer to my account as soon as I picked up the parcel. Sounded perfect. No heavy lifting, no overtime, no weird contracts. Just a quick drive, and the money was already on the way. I messaged the guy who posted it. His name was Gary. He responded almost instantly, like he'd been waiting. He thanked me, said he couldn't make the trip himself due to an injury, and stressed that I had to be very careful with the package. His only rule? Don't open it. Just deliver it. I agreed. It wasn't my business. I just wanted the money. He sent me a time and place to meet him. A parking lot outside a small cafe on the city's outskirts. The whole thing felt a little odd, but not enough to turn down easy cash. I arrived at the parking lot just before our agreed time. It was mostly empty, except for a few scattered cars and an old truck near the back. Gary was already there, standing near a beat-up sedan, hands in his pockets. He wore dark sunglasses, even though the sun was barely out, and his posture was stiff, like he was in a hurry but trying to act normal. The moment I stepped out of my car, he moved fast. No greetings, no small talk. Just pulled a thick sealed envelope from his jacket and shoved it into my hands. It was heavier than I expected, packed tight. "Don't open it," he reminded me, his voice low and firm. "No questions. Just deliver it. These are personal documents." I hesitated. Personal documents? Then why all the secrecy? "Why so careful with it?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He waved me off. "Family stuff. It's complicated." His fingers twitched slightly as he glanced around the lot. "Just make sure it gets to the address. That's all." I checked my phone. The money was already in my account, just like he promised. That was all I really needed to know. "All right," I said, tucking the envelope into my jacket. I'll take care of it." Gary nodded, then turned without another word, heading back to his car. His door slammed shut, and he drove off almost before I could step away. I stood there for a second, watching his taillights disappear down the street. Something about the whole thing felt off, but the job was simple. I got into my car, started the engine, and pulled onto the road. The address was about 40 minutes away, deep in the suburbs, where the streets were quieter and houses sat farther apart. I kept the radio low, focusing on the drive, trying not to let my mind wander. It was just a delivery, nothing more. But as I got closer to the destination, the feeling in my gut didn't go away. The house was old, sitting behind a half-broken fence, peeling paint on the walls, windows dark. No cars in the driveway, no sign of movement. Just a single porch light buzzing weakly in the evening dim. A man was already waiting outside. As soon as I handed him the package, everything changed. The man grabbed it, ripped it open, and immediately turned furious. His face twisted with rage as he pulled out the contents, just the thick envelope Gary had given me. He shook it, as if expecting something more to fall out. "What the hell is this?" he shouted. "Where's the rest?" I froze. My mind went blank. "What do you mean?" I stammered. "This is what I was given." His eyes darkened. "You think I'm stupid? You're trying to screw me over?" I raised my hands instinctively, trying to show I wasn't a threat. "Look, man, I don't know what's going on. I was just paid to deliver this." His nostrils flared, his jaw clenched. Then, he took a step forward, voice dropping into a dangerous growl. "You think I won't do something about this?" I didn't like the way his hand hovered near his waist. Something told me he had a weapon. I needed to leave, now. "Listen, I don't know anything," I said quickly. I turned, making a break for my car. Bad move. I barely made it 3 steps before pain exploded across my back. A heavy blow. Then another. My legs buckled. My vision blurred. I hit the ground, gasping. I felt a sharp, searing pain in my side. Something deep. Something bad. My body refused to move. My mind was screaming at me to run, but everything was shutting down. I heard my own voice cry out. Then, nothing but darkness. I woke up in a hospital bed. The first thing I felt was pain. Deep, aching, unbearable. My side was tightly bandaged, and every breath sent fire through my ribs. My arms were weak. My head was spinning. The beeping of monitors filled the quiet room. I was alive. Somehow. A nurse noticed I was awake and rushed to call a doctor. A few minutes later, a police officer stepped in. "You're lucky," he said. "There were some people nearby. They saw what happened and called for help. Otherwise..." He didn't finish the sentence, but I got the message. I wouldn't be here. They questioned me, making me go over everything. The Craigslist ad, Gary, the package, the drive. I told them everything. The officer sighed. "You got caught in a drug operation. That package was supposed to contain more than what you delivered. The guy you met thought you were trying to steal from him." I felt sick. Apparently Gary had used me as a courier without telling me what I was actually transporting. Somewhere along the line, something had gone wrong. Maybe he kept part of it. Maybe there was a mix-up. Either way, the man I met had thought I was in on it. The police looked into me, but it was clear I wasn't involved. I was just an idiot who took a job without asking questions. A convenient fall guy. Now, my life is completely different. The damage to my kidney was severe. I need regular dialysis to survive. My body is weaker. I can't do the things I used to. I can't work like before. Gary disappeared. The police are looking for him, but they don't have much to go on. He covered his tracks well. They still ask me questions, but I don't have any answers. I only knew a first name and a phone number that no longer works. I lost more than just my health. I lost my sense of security. I don't trust people anymore. I don't look for side jobs online. I've learned the hard way that easy money always comes with a price, and sometimes that price is too high. Kevin was always the kind of guy who couldn't resist a good deal, especially if it was free. He spent hours scrolling through classified ads, looking for giveaways. Most of the time, it was junk. Broken microwaves, ripped couches, old TVs that probably hadn't worked in a decade. But he didn't care. He loved the thrill of it. So when he told me he'd found a free refrigerator online, I wasn't surprised. He said some guy named Justin was giving it away and that he'd already arranged to pick it up. I raised an eyebrow. You sure that's safe? I mean, there's usually a catch with stuff like that. What if it's busted or has bad wiring? Kevin just shrugged. I'll check it out when I get there. If it looks sketchy, I won't take it. That was the thing about Kevin. He always assumed people were being honest. The next day, I saw him pull into the driveway with a bulky, scratched-up fridge strapped in the back of a rented moving truck. He hopped out, grinning, and waved me over. Dude, this thing's solid. Justin even helped me load it up. It didn't look too bad, just some scuff marks on the sides, a little dent on the door. Pretty standard for a used appliance. I glanced inside. It smelled faintly of cleaning solution. The shelves were intact, and the light even flicked on when he plugged it into an extension cord to test it. Kevin was thrilled. Told you it was a good find, he said, giving it a pat. I didn't say anything. It seemed fine, but something about the whole thing still felt off. I just didn't know why. That night, I was watching TV when I heard a loud bang from Kevin's place. At first, I ignored it. He was probably just moving things around, trying to get the fridge into place. But then there was another noise, something heavier, like metal hitting the floor. I muted the TV, listening. A few seconds later, I caught the faint scent of something burning. I frowned and stood up, walking to my window. When I looked out, my stomach dropped. Thick black smoke was pouring from Kevin's kitchen window. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 as I ran outside. The operator picked up, but I barely registered what I was saying. I just kept repeating the address, telling them there was a fire. Kevin's front door was slightly open. Smoke billowed out in dark clouds, and inside, I could see flickering orange light. I hesitated. I couldn't hear him. No movement, no shouting. Nothing except the crackling of flames. Then, finally, a faint sound. A weak, wheezing cough. "Kevin!" I shouted, stepping closer to the doorway. No response. The smoke was too thick. I couldn't see anything beyond the entrance, and I knew if I went inside, I'd probably pass out before I found him. I backed away, heart pounding, and looked down the street, praying to hear sirens. Nothing yet. I turned back to the door. I had to do something. The fire trucks arrived within minutes, but by then, the flames had already reached the ceiling in Kevin's kitchen. Thick smoke poured from the windows, and I could hear the muffled shouts of firefighters as they rushed in. I stood back, watching helplessly as they fought their way through the blaze. Then, two of them emerged, carrying Kevin's limp body between them. They laid him on the grass in the front yard, and paramedics immediately swarmed around him, checking for a pulse, opening an oxygen mask, doing whatever they could. I barely registered what was happening. Just an hour ago, everything had been fine. Now, Kevin's house was turning into an inferno. The flames spread into the living room, licking at the walls and furniture. The firefighters battled to contain it, dousing everything with water. but it took them a long time to get it under control. By the time the fire was finally out, half of the house was destroyed. The kitchen was unrecognizable. Charred remains of cabinets, blackened countertops, and the twisted metal frame of what was left of the fridge. One of the firefighters approached me, pulling off his helmet. "Looks like an electrical fire," he said grimly. "Started in the fridge." I stared at him. "Are you sure?" He nodded. Wiring was completely shot. Could have been faulty repairs or... He hesitated. Or tampered with. My stomach twisted. Kevin was rushed to the hospital, still unconscious. I had no idea if he was going to make it. Later, we got more details. Kevin survived, but the news wasn't good. He had severe burns on his arms and back, and worse, he'd suffered a spinal injury from collapsing during the fire. The doctors said he might never walk again. I visited him when he finally woke up. His face was pale, his expression empty. The moment they told him he was paralyzed, something inside him just broke. Meanwhile, the police were investigating. They tried to track down the guy who had given him the fridge, Justin, but the contact info Kevin had was fake. The phone number didn't exist. The address Kevin picked it up from was an abandoned lot. No records, no witnesses. And then came the worst part. It wasn't just an accident. The fire investigators were almost certain the fridge had been rigged. The wiring had been deliberately damaged in a way that made a short circuit inevitable. Someone had set Kevin up. Kevin had to move in with his relatives on the other side of the city. He was still trying to adjust to life in a wheelchair, but the change had shattered him. He stopped talking much, stopped smiling. The guy who used to chase every free deal, always optimistic, was gone. His house was beyond saving. After the fire, it was boarded up, the windows sealed with plywood. It stood there like a burned-out shell, a reminder of what happened. I walked past it every day, the blackened walls still carrying the faint smell of smoke. I kept thinking about that fridge. Who does something like that? And why? Maybe if I'd insisted on checking it with him, if we'd been more careful, we could have avoided this. But we hadn't thought about the worst-case scenario. Now, every time I see someone giving something away for free, I wonder what's really behind it. And I wonder if the person who set Kevin up has done it before, or if they'll do it again. Since childhood, I love taking pictures. It started as a hobby, but over time, I began taking small paid jobs, weddings, birthdays, corporate events. Nothing big, but it brought in extra cash. I put up ads online, hoping to find more interesting projects. One evening, I got a message from a man who introduced himself as the organizer of a private party. He said they needed a photographer for just a couple of hours and offered a good rate, better than usual. He asked me to keep it confidential, saying the guests wanted privacy. It sounded a little mysterious, but not exactly suspicious. Private events weren't uncommon, and the pay was hard to turn down. We agreed I would arrive at the address he provided, where someone would meet me. He emphasized punctuality and reminded me again not to disclose the location in advance. That last part was a bit odd, but I figured it was just some high-profile guests wanting to avoid attention. When I arrived, the place wasn't what I expected. It was an old house, slightly run down, with all the windows closed. No cars, no people, no signs of an event. No music, no chatter, nothing that suggested a party was happening inside. I stepped out with my camera and walked around, looking for any sign that I was in the right place. Nothing. No decorations, no movement inside. Just silence. Before I could decide what to do, the door opened. A man in jeans and a cap stood there. He looked at me and said, Come in, it's all inside. His tone was flat, no warmth or excitement. I hesitated for a second but stepped inside. The moment I entered, I noticed the heavy smell of tobacco. The air was thick with it, as if people had been smoking in there for hours. Somewhere in another room, I could hear muffled voices, low, steady conversation. Down the hall, another man sat in a chair. He didn't say anything, just looked at me. His stare was blank, unreadable. No one was dressed for a party. No table, no decorations, no sign of guests. I frowned, shifting my camera bag on my shoulder. "Where is everyone?" I asked. No answer. Just a brief glance exchanged between the two men. A wave of panic hit me. What if this wasn't a party at all? What if it was a trap? The two men started asking questions. Was I alone? Did anyone know where I was? Their voices were casual, but something about the way they asked made my stomach twist. I kept my answers vague, pretending I had people waiting for me after the shoot. One of them smirked, the kind of smirk that made my skin crawl. I needed to leave. Now. I forced a smile. "I left an extra lens in my car. I'll just grab it and be right back." They didn't like that. One of them shifted slightly, as if considering stopping me, but I kept my tone light, unbothered. "Just a minute," I said, already backing toward the door. My fingers tightened around my camera as I stepped outside. The second I cleared the doorway, I turned and bolted. I practically threw myself into the driver's seat, slammed the door shut, and locked it. My hands fumbled for the keys as I tried to steady my breathing. Then I saw movement. One of the men had stepped outside. He waved his arms, calling after me. "Hey, where are you going? We're not done yet." His voice was sharp, urgent. I didn't wait. I turned the key, and the engine roared to life. My heart pounded as I gripped the wheel. My fingers felt numb, but I managed to throw the car into reverse. He took a step forward, his expression changing, but I wasn't about to stick around to see what he would do next. I hit the gas, spun the wheel, and sped away. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely steer. I grabbed my phone, trying to call my friend, but my fingers kept slipping over the screen. The adrenaline made everything feel surreal, like my body wasn't listening to my brain. By the time I reached a brightly lit gas station, I pulled in and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The realization sank in. I had barely gotten away. My hands clenched the steering wheel as I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I didn't even want to think about what would have happened if I had stayed. I went straight to the police. The problem was, I didn't know much about the men. No names, no full descriptions, just an address. But when they looked it up, the officer frowned. "That house has been empty for a long time," he said. "Nobody lived there. Nobody rented it. Whoever those men were, they had set this up. Maybe I was the first person they had lured there. Maybe I wasn't." The thought made my stomach turn. After that, I changed the way I worked. Every client call was now a video call. I checked every location beforehand and never went to shoots alone. If a job ever felt even slightly off, I declined it, no matter how good the money was. I got lucky that night. Now, I warn every photographer I know, never go alone. Never trust a job without verifying it first. It's terrifying how easy it is to walk into something you can't walk out of. I was desperate for a job when I found the ad. Live-in caregiver needed. Good pay. Housing provided. A man named Harry responded when I inquired. He said I'd be taking care of an elderly relative and helping around the house. Simple enough. We exchanged a few messages and he outlined the conditions: separate room, generous salary, but one strict rule: no visitors, no talking to neighbors. I figured he just valued his privacy. Maybe he had family issues. It wasn't my place to judge. The money was too good to pass up, so I agreed to meet him for an interview. We met at a small diner. Harry looked ordinary, mid-30s, slim build, neat clothes, but there was something jittery about him. He kept glancing at the door, tapping his fingers on the table. Still, he was polite, smiled a lot, explained that his mother was bedridden, needed full-time supervision, and hadn't left her room in years. The way he emphasized that part, she never leaves the room. She can't. It stuck with me. What really caught me off guard was his urgency. You can start tomorrow. There's no time to waste. It felt rushed, but I told myself it was fine. If his mother was in bad shape, of course he'd be anxious to find help. And honestly, I needed the money. Badly. So I nodded, shook his hand, and that was that. The next day, I arrived at the house. It was old, tucked away in a quiet, run-down neighborhood. Not completely abandoned, but distant from everything else. The paint was peeling, the windows were dark, and the yard was overgrown. Harry was already outside when I got there. He was waiting by the gate, arms crossed, eyes darting around like he was checking to see if anyone was watching. "Listen," he said, before I could even greet him. "No questions. Just make sure she doesn't get out. And keep her quiet." I felt a chill run through me. The way he said it, it wasn't the usual concern of a son worried about his mother wandering off. It was firmer, like a warning. I asked why, and he hesitated. Then he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She's not well. She gets confused. If she leaves the room, she could hurt herself." It was reasonable enough. At least that's what I told myself. Inside, the house was dim, the air stale. The curtains were drawn shut, and there was barely any furniture. Just the essentials: a couch, an old TV, a coffee table with nothing on it. The kitchen was even more bare bones. A fridge with a few bottles of water, half a loaf of bread, a carton of eggs. No fresh produce, no real meals. Harry noticed me looking. "I'll be gone for a while. Just stick to the rules. You'll be fine." I tried to ask more, tried to make small talk, but he wasn't interested. "Follow the instructions. Don't attract attention." That was all he kept saying. Something felt off. The whole setup. The way he spoke. The way he kept glancing at the hallway, where the door to his mother's room was. But I pushed it aside. I'd only just arrived. Maybe I was overthinking. Then, after he left, I decided to check on his mother. At some point, I heard faint moans coming from behind the closed door at the end of the hallway. It wasn't loud, just a weak, muffled sound, like someone in pain, but too exhausted to cry out. I hesitated, listening. The sound came again. I walked over and tried the doorknob. Locked. Something about that didn't sit right with me. Why would an elderly, bedridden woman be locked inside her own room? I pressed my ear to the wood and heard slow, labored breathing, then a soft, pained whimper. This wasn't normal. I found Harry sitting in the living room, staring at his phone. "Give me the key," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I need to check on her." His whole body stiffened. He didn't look up. "No." I waited, expecting some kind of explanation, but all he said was, "It's for her safety." I took a step closer. "Harry, she's in pain. What if she needs a doctor?" That's when he finally looked at me, his face unreadable. Then, in a tone that made my stomach drop, he said, "Stay out of it. Do your job and nothing else." A cold sweat broke out down my back. He wasn't just being stubborn. He was warning me. I thought about walking out right then, but my brain wouldn't stop circling back to that sound from behind the locked door. I told myself I'd stay a little longer, just to figure out what was really going on. Before heading out, Harry gave me one last instruction. Don't leave the house unless absolutely necessary. Don't talk to anyone. And don't let anyone in. Then he left. I stood there for a long time, staring down the hallway, wondering what I had just gotten myself into. I woke up in the middle of the night to a whisper. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but then I heard it again. A low, shaky voice right outside my room. Pomogiti, kto-nibudь. My blood turned to ice. I sat up, barely breathing. The whisper came again, but this time I realized it wasn't outside my room. It was coming from beneath me, from the basement. I reached for my phone, then hesitated. If I called Harry, what would he do? If I called the police, what if I was wrong? What if this really was just a sick old woman with dementia? I grabbed the flashlight from my bag and forced myself to stand. The basement door was at the end of the hall, near the locked room. It was heavy, old wood, and had a latch instead of a knob. When I stepped closer, the whispering stopped. I crouched down and aimed the flashlight at the narrow gap under the door. I could just barely make out a pair of trembling fingers stretching toward the light. Then a weak, raspy voice. Please, help me. I need a doctor. My stomach twisted. I was about to unlatch the door when I heard the front door slam open. Footsteps. Fast. Angry. Harry was back. What the hell are you doing? His voice boomed through the hallway. I turned, heart hammering, and saw him standing there, his face twisted in rage. I had never seen him like this before. I told you not to go near there, he snarled, taking a step toward me. My mind raced. If I admitted what I had heard, what I had seen, would he let me walk out of here alive? The basement door behind me was dead silent. I straightened up, forcing my voice to stay steady. I heard something. She was calling for help. His eyes darkened. You're imagining things. I shook my head. Harry, if she's sick, she needs help. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You broke the rules. That's when I knew. This wasn't just about an old woman. I needed to get out. Now. Harry's phone rang. For a split second, he was distracted. It was enough. I grabbed my bag from the table and bolted toward the front door. He shouted my name, but I didn't stop. My hands fumbled with the lock. I got it open just as I heard his footsteps pounding behind me. I didn't turn around. I just ran. I sprinted down the empty street, my pulse hammering in my ears. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest police station. The officers didn't believe me at first, but I told them everything. About the locked room, the whispers, the basement, the way Harry had refused to let me inside, the way he had threatened me for even trying. They sent a unit to the house. What they found made the news. There was no bedridden woman in a locked room. But there was a woman in the basement. She was frail, barely conscious, and had been kept there for months with no medical care. She was Harry's mother, yes, but she hadn't been sick. She had been imprisoned. Harry was arrested for abuse and unlawful imprisonment. I was questioned, but in the end, all I could say was the truth. I had been hired to care for her, but I had never even seen her face. If I had followed his rules, I would have been an accomplice. I try not to think about what would have happened if I had stayed, if I had ignored the whispers. But sometimes, late at night, I do.